Welcome, everybody. This is Denny with Why Is This True? And joining me today is Karl Mollison from teamarchangel.com. And Karl and I are going to continue with our ongoing series of channelings that we've been doing for just about a year now. And we're getting up into the mid-high 40s with all the different subjects that we've been doing this with. And today we're going to channel the light being Whitney Houston, who I understand did need a spirit rescue. And I would like to invite Karl to explain what he does in the channeling. And specifically, I would like you, Karl, to talk about the actual channeling process and how it works in concert with Creator, and how what we call the channel filter comes into play. And I bring this up specifically because we do have our detractors out there, and they're asking questions that I think from their perspective seem quite intelligent and quite insightful. But I think a lot of these questions come about as a result of not being very familiar with the channeling methodology that you employ for these sessions. So welcome, Karl, and invite you to talk about that a bit, if you will.
Yes, thank you, Denny. Well, I am a channeler, among other things, and do a lot of work with people to help facilitate self-healing and divine healing, both. And one of the aspects of my work is to help earthbound spirits to make their full ascension to the light. It turns out that it's quite a frequent problem. About 1 out of 3 people who pass do not reach the light right away. And this is because of confusion, being disconnected, being non-believers. There's a list of risk factors. And this is a tragedy, because these beings are really lost. They're feeling disconnected. They have lost a lot of their ability to think and to be aware of things, because their normal body senses, of course, are gone once they leave their body behind. They have to reacquire their light being capabilities, and they need to be in a fairly high vibrational state for that to happen. And if they're not, as they transition from the body, this is where the problem comes in. So as a channeler, I can reach out and talk with those beings, as well as other types of spirit beings, but I can also channel beings in the light. And that's what you and I have been doing these past months for the most part. And it's an opportunity to catch up and get a story from people who we've known or read about, public figures and others who've had a role to play in some of the things we're interested in, and hear what their perspective is now about what happened to them in their lives, how they view things now, and get an inside look at how the divine realm sees us and sees the human dilemma. In order to do that, we are skirting the normal disconnection that humans experience. This is not Creator's plan for us to be disconnected, but it has happened over the millennia and now becomes humans' problem to solve. We need divine help with it, but the divine realm will not short circuit our responsibility in this and the learning curve we're going through to figure out how to navigate and do a better job and to overcome the difficulties we face. So when we talk to a light being, there are constraints on them, what they can say and what they can't. They cannot give us too much advanced look at things. They can't help us too much beyond our own understanding and capabilities. They can add to our knowledge. They can give encouragement. They can fill in some blanks for us that help us to understand things. But there are limits. And so one of the things that happens is there is a kind of an approval process that takes place with Creator that governs what they're able to say and what they're not. And it's true of any member of the divine realm. They're not allowed to cheat on your behalf and to give you extra advantages, extra help, extra assistance, and extra wisdom, and so on. If you're ready, however, to know more, they can supply those additional sort of extensions of your knowledge base. So it's kind of a fine line. So we're always doing a little bit of a dance, wanting to know things, but having to work within these rules and these guidelines. And there are many constraints because there are consequences for everything potentially in the exchange of information. Some people in the light have loved ones still present in the living, and there needs to be regard for them and respect for them and their feelings. And so there may be constraints on information to not interfere with them unduly, or to create a situation to cause embarrassment for anyone. We're always embarrassing ourselves, I guess, doing this strange, wacky thing that we do. But we're choosing that. And so to go and talk to someone arbitrarily and have them go on record, that's asking a lot of them. And that can have potential fallout and a backlash for us even. So one of the things that happens is that when people go back to the light, they're back in more of a native form as light beings. They are not the person you knew in the physical any longer, because that character is gone, that persona, which is a combination of the genomic expression of that life, the cultural trappings and influences, and the influence of the environment and the people they knew and what they learned and how, and the language they spoke, and all of the quirks of personality are trappings of that particular existence. And that is really gone. And so those people in the light now are more similar to one another in many respects. They think differently, they speak differently, and they're more on a kind of a shared wavelength in dealing with us in certain ways. And so there's a certain repetitiveness to the information that comes forth. And it's kind of a shared perspective because that's what we're dealing with here. We're getting a kind of a divine reflection of what we seek that is intended to help us, but still leave the burden largely on us and not to short circuit things too much.
Right.
So I hope this is helpful and gives a little bit of a feel for the dynamics of this.
Yeah, there's a great expectation on the part of a lot of viewers that when you channel someone deceased, that a lot of their character is going to come through, their inflections, their pronunciation of words, their accents, all of these things that you just mentioned about trappings of that particular lifetime is going to somehow be retained once they've passed, and once they're no longer an earthbound spirit and they go to the light. There's this expectation on the part of viewers that a lot of that, previous incarnation, that package of features is going to be taken with them, and you're going to see evidence of it in the channeling, in the word, in what they see when you speak as the light being who was formerly, like in this case, going to be Whitney Houston. So, and I've engaged with some of these people trying to explain that. Usually, I would say it's about a 50-50 proposition. A lot of people just come forward with this perspective as from a position of authority. Like if it were going to meet their criteria for credibility, then that's the way it would be, and anything else just fails the test. And so I know that there's a lot of people listening to this that it wouldn't matter what we say, or how we explained it, that would clear things up for them so that they could maybe look at what we're doing here with fresh eyes. It's just not in the cards in some cases, so we just have to come to terms with that. But I think it's helpful in these introductions here to explain the process that you go through, and the fact that you have a filter as a channeler, so to speak. And you've said this before, you have a certain vocabulary that you use. You have a certain cadence and inflection and manner in which this information is being communicated to you, and thus you translating it, so to speak, to communicate it to us. And that whole dynamic, that whole mechanism, I think, is, for the most part, very poorly understood for most people who consider themselves proficient when it comes to analyzing channelers.
Well, yes. And so let me add a little bit to the explanation. When you speak of filter, it's not a bad term for the divine translator that I'm taking advantage of. It is a kind of a conduit. You could think of it as a device that translates the thoughts of the light being into a stream of information that comes in through this filter and into my subconscious, and it's translated into Karl speak, working from my vocabulary, my understanding of things, so that it translates what's coming through into words and sentences that will be intelligible to me, so that I can speak them and also understand them, because I am part of the audience, and it is coming through me. So it is intended to be intelligible to me, but it will take advantage of my knowledge base, my vocabulary, my figures of speech many times. And it's because those things are ready at hand. And so this filter, this translator, can tap into that and just pull those off the shelf and plug them in. And it makes it intelligible as far as the information stream, but it won't necessarily be more specific to the light being origin than to me as the person doing the final level of translation, if you will. It sort of comes in and fits a certain template that I represent,
right,
as this recipient. So it's more akin in a way to a telegraph signal. If you think back to the old days of the telegraph, where there was someone sending and someone receiving, and it's like dots and dashes. So there's no inflection, there's no caricature, there's no slang typically involved. It has to be understandable. It has to be common wordings and so on.
Right.
Because that suits the purpose at hand, which
right.
is the conveying of information and knowledge. And it's not a show. It's not an experiencing of the person in the way we would as a physical entity.
Right.
So this would be an interesting question for a creator, because I do bump into this question from time to time, and I would like to know whether these channelings that come through as characters, almost like a caricature of the person, are at all authentic, or if they are a performance done by more likely a low-level being wanting to impress and wanting to show off what it can do in stepping into the persona of someone.
Right. It's kind of like reminds me of like the old movies about mediums, and they're all sitting around the table in a big circle, and then the mediums start to speak, and the woman goes, "Oh my gosh, it's my husband," because he's got the voice of the, or there's some personal trappings that the medium is putting forth to the group there, so that he's instantly recognizable as this person. While as my experience with other channelers as well as you in your work, I've always been impressed about how the light being is so detached from their previous incarnation. And I brought this up before, but the first time that it really hit me was when we did James Forrestal, and he seemed so unconcerned about how he had passed, and that seemed so dramatic and so beyond what we would normally consider a way of being, killed or even just dying, or any extreme you think of. I mean, to be thrown out of a window like that, and he just seemed so. In the channeling, he didn't seem to be, and I was new to it at that time. That was like the second one we'd done, so I thought I was expecting some more descriptions or something about that event that would show his level of connection to that incarnation. And what I came away with was that it wasn't really that much of a concern to him. He didn't really care about that so much. And then later, I learned, that the average human has 423 incarnations. So you can imagine all the different life experiences that you would have. And as a light being, you would probably have access to all those memories complete from all of those lives. So then that starts to explain how you could be kind of detached from any one life's experience, because even though all of them could have been remarkable in some way or another.
Well, they do count, but they are more important to us when we're down here in the physical.
Yeah.
When we go back to the higher astral plane, we're in a different mode, and the human doings are not directly translated or impacting the light being per se. It's human business, and it's earth plane business, and it's a wounding of an aspect of the soul that's expressed during a physical human incarnation. So it's compartmentalized, basically, and is no longer uppermost on the radar of the light being. They're still concerned about the big picture. They're concerned about the fate of humanity and so on. But they have other things that they do and many other explorations. The soul is really quite vast. It is vastly larger than we are as an expression in the physical. So it encompasses much, much more, multiple layers and other dimensions, and involved in many, many activities, and even things going on simultaneously. So it's hard for us to appreciate what that is like. But this human aspect is still only a tiny portion, you see. And even though it might be a really juicy life story, they don't hold grudges. They don't have regrets, because they understand the nature of the exercise, and that they're coming down, they're going to be at risk, bad things are likely to happen, they're going to have to sweep up after it. But that's for another time, and they're going to be unconcerned right now because they're in bliss, and they have Creator with them, and there's nothing greater, nothing better than that. And so the struggles we feel are trivial to them, because they know we're immortal, and it's all very temporary. And the human lifespan is very, very short. So it's when you think about immortality, and the average human lifespan is truly but a blink of an eye.
Yeah. And then so we'll get started here with the channeling, but I just wanted to say, Whitney Houston's probably a great example of like this, the classical shooting star story, where somebody rises to fame and goes through quite a huge change in their life, and she was in her early 40s or whatever when she passed, and there's a typical, you will have seen the short bio of her as an introduction to to this video that we're doing. So I won't rehash all of that. But she, she was a unique figure, but somewhat of a archetypal figure too, especially in modern days. Maybe not even in modern days. Maybe this kind of a story could be traced back into human history, where somebody kind of bursts onto the scene with such huge talent. And one of the things that Jen and I were talking about last night was how music is such a divine tool for the upliftment of humanity, and that was her initial mark, her initial public mark was her church life, her gospel singing, and that was her kind of genesis for her skill, was around the idea of God and gospel singing, and then it went on from there, so. A lot of the questions are kind of centered around that whole aspect of her short life, and but that whole music idea, the idea of music, really came through when we did the channeling with John Lennon. I mean, it seemed to me that in that channeling he took extra care to make sure that we understood the powerful purpose of music for the human experience.
Yeah, indeed, it is a divinely inspired expression of Creator. And this is something that is much more profound than people realize. The great thinkers all through history have pondered this and realized there's something really, really important about this. We don't quite know what it is. And back in the day when belief was more common than not, people attributed it to a divine influence. But it goes much deeper, and it is part of the warp and woof of the human being purposefully, because we were created to both create and be receptive to music. And that is a purposeful aspect and incorporation into our being of an understanding of music and the ability to respond to it. And science has always seen this as an extreme oddity because there's no trivial explanation for why we should be so responsive to musical tones, or that music should have the properties that it does and be so pleasing. And there's a regularity and a mathematical precision to it that defies understanding. And that's true of all of mathematics because it's all divine. And science doesn't allow that explanation in. But that's what they bump into.
Yeah.
So this is just as mysterious to everyone as it is to the artists themselves. And, many have commented that music comes from somewhere outside of them and they don't really understand it, but it's something mysterious and elusive, but very profound.
Right.
Bob Dylan talks about the origin of his lyrics and hardly takes credit for it in those discussions because there's a realization it's coming from elsewhere.
Yeah.
And he's not working at it. It's just coming into him. and this is where music originates. It is divine. So we may well hear some perspectives on that. It would be wonderful, in fact, because people so underappreciate the arts.
Yeah.
But they are all divine, and that's part of our makeup because we're love-based beings. And how do we experience and express love? The appreciation of the beauties of nature and the love we have of animals and the love we have of gardens and the beautiful greenery that we see in the forests and the meadows and on and on and on, the flowers. They're there to delight the eye of human. And it's the same with music, the same with great works of sculpture. And the other aspects of creativity in form, and great architecture, you can feel it in certain buildings, edifices. There's something larger than life when you experience them. And what it is, it's a purity of divine expression, I think.
Right.
Because that's the common element, the common thread. It's God saying hello through us.
Yeah.
Because we're part of that. And so we have that within us. It's our divinity on display, basically.
Right.
Unless it's heavy metal. So that's little joke there. Don't take offense.
Yeah.
Don't
Okay.
bash
Well,
your guitar.
just for that, I'm going to put a heavy metal artist in the lineup, so he can come on board as a light being and defend his art.
No bad deed goes unpunished. That's perfect action, folks. So.
All right, so I'll make a note of that. Well, thanks, Karl. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and talk to the light being who was Whitney Houston.
Okay, it'll just take me a moment to get in the proper state of consciousness and to set up safety around the work. Very scrupulous about that. Not everyone is as careful and attentive to those details, but they really should be, because there are many interlopers, many low-level beings of all kinds out there who are happy to connect and talk with you. And many people are being minded by handlers because they've fallen into that trap and been rewarded. And then they think they've got some inside track, and they create a persona and go from there. And it's very, very sad, because people are devoting so much time and so much effort, and often being misguided and misdirected. So, people don't like to hear that. And I'm tired of saying it, because I cringe inside every time I do. And I don't want people saying that about me, but yet I'm saying it about others. But it is the way things are. And that's part of my role, is to bring forward truth as I understand it. And this is what I hear from Creator.
Right.
And when I go looking for compatriots, they're very, very hard to find. And I just don't get involved with that anymore, because the numbers are so few of authentic people. And then when you start to play that game, then it's like bringing it to a head. And
right.
I, for one, don't want to be in the business of being the traffic cop for the spiritual community. And it just invites a lot of resentments. And so I just caution people, just, follow your heart, use your discernment, and just take everything with a grain of salt, including what I say. I'm just a guy, and I'm doing the best I can. And that's all I can promise you, is to be as careful as I can, and to be true to this process, and to keep it safe to the best of my ability. And beyond that, I can't attest to anything.
Right. And
this is one of the problems overall, that the divine realm will not prove its existence to you. If you want to set that up as a goal, you will likely fail, because they will teach you a lesson in the process. You can't put us to the test, because you approach then with doubt. And if you approach with doubt, they have to honor your doubt, and they'll back away, and they'll let you be unsatisfied. You won't get the proof you're seeking. And that's part of the dance we do in all these interviews also, that they will not come out and give you chapter and verse and provable facts and forensic details that you can go and discover. Go look in my backyard under the oak tree, and there's that chest with all the weapons that were used and the notes between them, and they just saved it for a rainy day, but we're going to out them, and that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Much as one might like.
Yeah.
Because this is for us to have as a test of faith, among other things.
Yep.
And it sounds bizarre. If the fate of humanity is in the balance, which it is always, to not get a leg up and to have even proof of God as a starting point makes it all the tougher. But it's all the more meaningful if we succeed nonetheless. So that's the way I would look at this.
Right.
So, it's all up to the viewer to decide for themselves. Are they in, or are they out, or are they on the fence? And, good luck, and I wish you all well. And, I'm just doing the best I can here, and I hope that you find it helpful.
Okay. Very good.
This is Whitney Houston speaking.
Thank you for joining us. Was your death due to an accident, an overdose, a ritual sacrifice, or something else? Can you explain what happened and why?
This was in the final act, and an act of carelessness on my part. As a drug taker of long standing, this was a risk for me many, many times. And one is often on the edge in imbibing substances not ideal for the body. The deeper history is one of having a number of negative influences in play. There were both naive, unwitting participants in this who aided and abetted me in my drug taking, and who also were involved in putting me in harm's way, but not deliberately. The deeper truth about my career and many celebrities is that there is an overlay of manipulation and orchestration to constrain and to confound the plans of many who reach prominence. And the bad actors here are the sources of negativity you have discussed many, many times and interacted with their doings many, many times, who are the dark spirits who attack people relentlessly to drag them down and to bring misfortune in a way to create emotional disarray and discord they can prey upon and draw energy from in order to continue their existence. And in addition, the physical opponents you face as human beings still, after thousands of years of interference, there are still negative extraterrestrials among you who desire your subjugation and demise as well. There is an orchestrated effort to drag down those who are the achievers, those who become the leaders, who have a positive influence, in particular, a positive spiritual influence. And this includes the artists, as you are absolutely correct about the alignment of the arts with the divine. That is the purpose for music and art of all kinds, that it is the demonstration of divine love in action and speaks to the heart and soul both on many, many levels. It calls forth the higher impulses and an echoing from the divine level of each being when they are in resonance with a work of art or musical expression. It is the calling of the soul to be in harmony with Creator's love And wherever love is on display, the individual soul will harmonize and will be emanating a love frequency that is orchestrated through the higher self and will reach the being from within. This is the tingling you feel within, the great joy that swells up within on hearing a soaring tune or a heartfelt lyric that transcends the ordinary and sheds new meaning on your life or how you see the lives of others, and becomes a way to exalt the existence. All of this works against the darkness, and the darkness will seek to snuff it out in various ways. A most convenient way is to sabotage the individual themselves by putting temptation in their way, to create trouble and discord within their life. This is typically done through the arrangement of affairs or sexual temptations to prey on vulnerabilities and to induce the suspension of moral qualms to engage in affairs or to even do acts of harassment to manipulate others for sexual gratification that can come back to haunt the person later on and discredit them and potentially destroy all their gains in reputation, and their audience will evaporate and their influence is withdrawn from society as a consequence, because people will no longer wish to hear their product. This is done very frequently through the temptation in using drugs of all kinds. And this is the primary reason that the use of drugs is encouraged throughout the arts and entertainment world. It is not because the people are selfish and self-indulgent and have more money than they know what to do with. It is orchestrated and encouraged through manipulation via mind control. If you think about this, an artist with a very heavy performing schedule, with many burdens and obligations, and having a retinue of people who they must support to maintain their operation, for security, for planning, for the business end, to see to contracts and the obligations in tax considerations, and all of the interplay with the many venues in their performing, with the tight scheduling and the demands to be sharp and to be in top form, to not disappoint the fans and the people who lavish money on them, to imbibe substances that diminish their capability, is not only risky, it is sheer folly. There is more taking place here than self-indulgence. It is going against self-preservation to compromise the ability to perform when one is a performer. There needs to be a deeper look into cause and effect here to fully understand why so very many artists burn out young and die young, often at their own hand. So my demise was self-caused in the final act, but was the end product of a long period of manipulation on multiple levels, both of myself and people around me, to create an environment that would tolerate my drug habits and put me at risk. This is happening across the board through all of society worldwide, and is a very dramatic demonstration of why people are not truly in control of themselves.
Okay, thank you. What was it like for you in your transition, your time as an earthbound spirit, and your spirit rescue?
My transition was, of course, not expected. This was not a suicide. This was a reckless act that put my body at risk, and I reached a point of no return and was disconnected from the physical, at which point I entered a state of being in limbo, truly, because I was cut off from all my senses. And this is typical of the early transition phase. After all, the normal senses lack sensory organs to execute their usual function, let alone the absence of a brain to filter and assign meaning to the input from sensory nerves to create the awareness of the surroundings, to have a sense of touch. And without hearing, without vision, without any kind of tactile input, it is very much like being buried alive in a vast nothingness, with nothing as a reference point, with no anchor, nothing to lean against, nothing to use as a springboard for a new idea. The memory apparatus is disconnected as well, because much memory is anchored in the physical body in various ways. It is part of consciousness, but it becomes somewhat constrained and compartmentalized and must be re-accessed in a differing way, as is true of all other senses, including vision. One needs to grow new eyes after their transition in order to truly appreciate the outreach available to them and to see where they need to go. This is a function of learning and acquisition, and a sort of consequence of vibrational state, as many would describe this from the metaphysical perspective. When one is too dragged down by circumstances through impairment, for example, this puts the individual at a disadvantage, and that was the case for me. I was in a stupor and remained in a stupor, even though I left my body as consciousness and was in a pure state of consciousness. It was still in a state of disconnection. And in that state of disconnection, I was floundering and alone and unable to have coherent thoughts. And in that state, I was assaulted by dark beings who attacked me and were extremely vicious in taunting me and threatening and denigrating me and doing everything they could think of to turn the aspects of myself that I had most prized and valued on their head, and to denigrate me and point out my plight as proof of my worthlessness, and that now this would be the beginning of an end for me, and the end would be a kind of ongoing and endless torment. Needless to say, this gave me no ability to raise myself up. Once this commenced in earnest, I was barely hanging by a thread to any kind of coherent thought. And the ability to think positively under such circumstances was truly ruled out. This was an onslaught of high volume invective and torturous notions that rained on me without stop, without any relief. This was done to create within me the greatest possible flow of energy through me. It was a dark and twisted and tormented emotional energy of anguish and despair and fear, because this was my reaction to the ongoing attack. But that was its purpose, to generate those very energies, because these were being siphoned away and used by these spirit attackers. This is the game they play, although it is much worse than a game in the experiencing from the perspective of one tormented. This was the state of being for me for the entire time between my death and when I was recently rescued at last by the channel here, reaching out to find me and to make a connection and begin to work with my energy to bring in divine solutions, to first of all remove these dark tormentors and then begin to heal the woundings that created my isolated and disconnected state. And once that began in earnest, the possibility to see and feel the light began to return. And it was at that point that I was able to make a connection for the first time with light callers who were sent at the first moment to escort me back to the light, but I was unable to see them or work with them. And this reopening of communication through healing was the key that allowed me to be escorted to return to the light, where I began my journey into that incarnation. Without that rescue, I would still be there, tumbling in the dark, disconnected and alone. And if not forgotten, then essentially on a backwater that would have caused endless torment for me, barring a similar rescue attempt. we cannot overemphasize how dreadful this is. People will not want to hear this. It is not a pretty picture, and it seems to fly in the face of the very idea of a loving God, that when one is down and at their lowest ebb and lose their life, that they could end up in such a torturous circumstance, other than perhaps through divine retribution. But we can assure you this is quite a common dilemma and affects many, many souls because they are not prepared for transition. This is not the fault of God. It is the failing of the humans themselves to do their homework, to do their preparation, to be sure of their alignment with the divine, and to be on a loving vibrational wavelength in their thoughts and actions. If they embrace this idea and cultivate this capability, they will transition without hesitation because they will already be on Creator's wavelength, and the light callers will be seen and will have no trouble assisting them. This is the challenge for humanity to meet through learning and growth, to return to a more uniform state of spiritual practice and creating a priority for themselves to maintain an alignment so they are always road ready for anything, no matter what might happen from one moment to the next. When you are in alignment with love and living through love, you will be impervious to most kinds of difficulty and harm that might befall another. But even if it is your time to exit, this will be no problem for you and will be uneventful, other than a rapid return to joy and bliss beyond your imagining. You can bypass this particular quandary entirely. And that would be our recommendation to all who hear this story, to not feel sorry for me, to not fear their own future, but to use this as an object lesson and an opportunity to think about preparation for themselves, so they are in alignment with the higher realms and expecting a reunion and looking forward to that reunion. It is really a rebirth that happens and not a death. There is no death. Each human being has an immortal soul that will continue on regardless of what happens in the physical. You will continue on somewhere. It is up to you where that somewhere happens to be. It is totally within your ability to control and govern. If you leave that to a default mode, you are taking a grave risk with your future, because if you are out of alignment emotionally and spiritually, you will likely struggle and there will likely be suffering involved. You are in the driver's seat always and must take this message seriously. It is not to be feared. It is to be learned from. And you can use our example as a kind of object lesson here, that even the high and mighty are vulnerable to their own doing. And if they are abusing themselves, neglecting themselves, selling themselves short, and allowing a state of disconnection from the divine, they can separate themselves and remain isolated. And that can go on for a very, very long time. We do not recommend this path for anyone because it is ghastly and also unnecessary. To stay in alignment need not be difficult. It is a matter of choice and then applying oneself to cultivate love. This is hardly a penalty, as there are so many benefits in living through love and the sharing of love. This is a prescription for blessings of all kinds.
Okay, thank you. Segments of the world's population have been greatly oppressed. Blacks in particular continue to be heavily targeted. Is there a hidden agenda behind this?